I knew something was wrong when my husband stopped visiting the hospital after the second day. Not the third day, not the fourth, the second. I told myself he was managing things at home, that a man could only be in one place at a time, that 31 years of marriage had earned him the right to my patience, even when my patience was the only thing keeping me from asking the question I was not yet ready to hear answered. I was 72 years old, recovering from a hysterectomy that had become more complicated than expected halfway through surgery. My blood levels had dropped. They were keeping me longer for monitoring. The window beside my bed showed me the same slice of Atlanta sky cycling from gray to dark to gray again, and I lay in that room doing what women of my generation do when the people who should show up don't. I found reasons for their absence that protected everyone but me. On the fourth night, the silence in that room became its own kind of weight. I picked up my phone, not to call anyone, just to feel connected to something that wasn't ceiling tiles and the sound of the IV drip. I opened Facebook, the way you open a window in a room that has run out of air. My son Nathaniel's wedding photographs loaded first. I did not know the wedding was that day. I had been told the date was still being finalized. I had believed it because I had no reason not to. But there it was. The ceremony, the reception, candles and white linen, and the faces of people I had known for 20 years, looking warm and celebratory in the particular way of people who have gathered for something they believe is entirely good. Nathaniel dancing, laughing with his head thrown back, the way he laughed when he was 9 years old, and I had not yet become something his father needed to explain away. And beside my husband Gerald, in a charcoal suit I had never seen inside our closet or on any hanger in any room of our home, stood a woman, not at the edge of the frame, not hovering uncertainly the way guests hover when they are not sure where they belong. She was placed, in every photograph, positioned the way family is positioned. The caption read, "What a joyful day. Thank you to my real mother and father for everything." I read it once. I read it again. I read it a third time because some things the mind refuses to process on the first pass. Gerald had liked the post. A small thumbs up beneath my son's words. Casual, simple, like it cost him nothing. I set the phone face down on the tray beside me. 30 minutes passed. I know it was 30 because I watched the time without meaning to. The way you watch something when your mind has gone somewhere it cannot come back from quickly. Then my phone lit up. A number I did not recognize. 7 words. "Don't say a word. I'll handle it." I stared at that message for a long time. I did not know whether to be frightened or relieved or something else entirely. Something that did not have a name yet. Someone knew something. Someone was watching something I could not see from this hospital bed. I placed the phone face down. And then, in that dimmed room with the corridor quiet and the IV dripping, I did something I had never done in 31 years of marriage. I went back through every month of it with new eyes. My name is Elizabeth S. Holloway. I am 72 years old. I spent 34 years as a senior contract attorney at a firm in Atlanta that handled commercial real estate transactions of the kind that required someone to read every word of every document without trusting that the person who prepared it had your interests in mind. I retired at 68. I married Gerald Holloway at 41, when I was already the person I had built myself into and had no intention of becoming someone smaller. Or so I had believed. What I understood, lying in that hospital bed going back through 31 years with new eyes, was that becoming smaller does not happen in a single moment. It happens the way Gerald had apparently been building his other life. Gradually, incrementally, each adjustment small enough to feel like nothing until you look up and the shape of what you are standing in is entirely different from what you thought you were building. It started, I now understood, approximately 23 months earlier. That was when Gerald mentioned a woman he had connected with through a professional network. A real estate investment consultant, he said. Someone who understood commercial property and had expressed interest in a development concept he had been turning over for years. I had asked questions. He had answered them easily. I had moved on. That was the first thing I stopped looking at closely. The late evenings came 4 months after that. He called it the concept gaining traction. said the groundwork required hours he couldn't find during the day. I believed him because a busy husband was not automatically a suspicious husband, especially not one who still came home, still remembered the small things, still kissed my forehead while making coffee in the mornings the way he had done for 3 decades. Then the warmth between us shifted. Gradually. The way a room cools when someone leaves a window open somewhere you cannot find. He called it the natural settling of a long marriage and said it with such calm certainty that I accepted it rather than questioned it. I had no evidence of anything else. No dramatic mistakes. Just distance arriving slowly enough to feel explainable. I thought about the charcoal suit. A man does not buy a suit like that for an ordinary occasion. He buys it for a specific day he has already imagined himself inside. How long had he had it? Where had he worn it before today? What other days had there been that I knew nothing about? Looking back, what unsettled me most was not any single lie. It was how individually reasonable everything had seemed while it was happening. No one change large enough to force a confrontation. No one explanation strange enough to collapse under its own weight. Just small adjustments, tiny repositionings, one believable thing placed carefully beside another until an entirely different reality had been constructed around me without my noticing it happening. The nurse set the envelope on my tray the following morning. Large, manila, sealed. My room number written on the front in careful, unhurried handwriting. No name, no return address. She said it had been left at the front desk. Someone had called ahead, claimed they were sending flowers on behalf of Gerald Holloway. Needed to confirm the room number to coordinate delivery. Gerald had tagged the hospital in a reception photograph. Mentioned my recovery in the comments. Whoever left this envelope had known where I was before they ever called. They used my husband's name to confirm the room and never had to show their face. I opened it slowly. Inside was a folder organized with the kind of deliberateness that takes time and intention to produce. Financial transfer records. Screenshot exchanges between Gerald and a contact saved in someone's phone as RVP. Business. Investment solicitation documents for something called Holloway Property Ventures, formatted professionally, specific enough to sound credible. And underneath everything, a certified copy of our marriage certificate, pulled through Fulton County Public Records. I set that page down. I picked up the handwritten note, tucked inside the back cover. He told me he was divorced. I believed him. I'm sorry. You deserved better than both of us leaving you alone in here. I read it once. I set it down. I read the documents, every page twice. Then I read the note again. I did not cry. Something past crying had come online. Something cooler and more focused than anything I had felt in 4 days. I worked through the financials the way I had worked through contracts for 34 years. Gerald had asked for $60,000. The records showed $38,000 actually transferred. 2 separate installments, dates listed, account references included. I looked at those dates against the timeline I had been reconstructing in my mind all night. The first transfer arrived 4 months after Gerald told me this woman was simply a professional contact. He was collecting money from her while describing her to me as a business acquaintance. I looked at the name on the account records. RVP, the unsaved number. 7 words. Don't say a word, I'll handle it. I knew now who had sent it. The same woman who called the hospital using my husband's name to confirm my room without ever being seen. The same woman who assembled this folder and left it for a wife she had never met. The note said, "Leaving you alone in here." She knew about the surgery. She knew I was in this room. And she was angry about it, not at me. That distinction was in every word of the apology. I reached for my phone and called my oldest friend, Margaret. I was home by mid-morning. I want to be clear about what that decision meant. Walking back through that door was not weakness, and it was not confusion. I was not going back to Gerald. I was going back to everything I had built before him, and alongside him, every payment I had made toward that mortgage, every room I had furnished and maintained, the life that bore my name and my effort in every room. I was not about to leave any of it in his hands 1 day longer than I had to. Margaret arrived within the hour with food I hadn't asked for, and the specific energy I recognized immediately. Not sympathy. Assessment. She had been up thinking, and she had arrived knowing what came next. That is the quality of a friendship that has survived enough to stop being gentle, when gentle is not what is needed. She sat at my kitchen table, read the folder the way I had, methodically, without performance. And when she finished, she looked up and asked me a question I was not prepared for. "What is in your name alone?" I told her. "The car. A savings account I had opened before the marriage. Some professional assets tied to my own accounts." She asked about the mortgage. "Joint. Both names." She asked how much Gerald controlled from our shared accounts. I gave her the number and heard it land differently out loud than it ever had inside my head. She nodded once and told me something she had been carrying. 3 months ago, she attended a professional reception in Atlanta. Gerald was there with a woman. Margaret had assumed it was a work dinner. She meant to mention it, and then my surgery preparations had consumed everything, and the moment passed. She told me this without apology performance. She was placing information where it now belonged. I opened the wedding photographs on my phone and held the screen toward her. She looked. "Yes," she said. "Same woman." Margaret gave me a name, Celeste Okafor. A family law attorney, she described plainly. A woman who handled complicated asset cases with the specific patience of someone who does not lose things she should win. I wrote it down. Gerald called that evening. His voice was warm and measured. The warmth of a man who believes the person on the other end of the line knows nothing and requires careful management. He asked how I was feeling. Said he would come by tomorrow. I told him that was fine. I kept my voice easy and gave him nothing to read. When I hung up, I looked at my hands. They were completely steady. That steadiness told me something I hadn't been able to name until that moment. That some part of me had already decided what came next, even before the rest of me had caught up. Gerald arrived the next morning with groceries he hadn't been asked to buy and an attentiveness that would have moved me 3 weeks ago. He stocked the kitchen with the specific things I kept. He remembered details. He always remembered details. I understood now that remembering details was not the same as being present. I let him be attentive. I thanked him where thanking was appropriate. I moved through the morning beside him and gave him nothing to read. When he left for what he called a meeting, I moved through the house methodically. I was not looking for something dramatic. Gerald was not a careless man. I understood that clearly. Careless men get caught early. I was not looking to prove what the folder had already shown me. I was trying to understand the dimensions of what had been passing through my life while I was still calling it a marriage. Near the entryway, behind the side table, a phone charger. Not his model, not mine. Photographed. In the kitchen drawer, a restaurant receipt. A Tuesday evening 8 weeks ago. Gerald had told me that Tuesday he was at a development conference in Savannah. He had texted me from the road. Photographed. In his home office, beneath the legal pad where he kept temporary notes, a business card from a commercial real estate firm. On the back, in Gerald's handwriting, a square footage figure and monthly lease estimate for warehouse space in Buckhead. A printed email thread about available units. Loading dock specifications, availability timelines. He had not been theorizing a venture. He had been building one, using time and resources and the financial credibility built inside our marriage to construct something outside it. Photographed. I sat down in Gerald's chair. Then I called Celeste Okafor. Her assistant answered. I gave my name. I said I needed a consultation on a family law matter. I had a date within the week. When I hung up, I stayed in that chair, Gerald's chair, in Gerald's office, inside the house that bore my name on the deed, and felt the first clean thing I had felt since before the surgery. Not anger, not satisfaction, direction. 2 weeks after I came home, a call came from a number I didn't recognize. I had learned to answer carefully. I picked up without saying my name and waited. The voice was young and slightly uncertain in the way of someone who has rehearsed what they plan to say and is discovering that the actual moment feels different from the rehearsal. She said, "Mrs. Holloway, this is Simone." A pause. "Nathaniel's wife." I sat down. She called from a number Gerald didn't have. That alone told me everything about the kind of caution already moving through that household. She said she had been thinking about me since the wedding. She said she noticed I wasn't there. Her voice was direct but uneven in places, like someone trying to sound more certain than they actually felt. She told me the explanation she had been given, that I was recovering and had specifically asked them not to delay the ceremony on my account, that I had insisted on being left alone to rest. She said she almost accepted it. Then she said, it felt strange, hearing people speak around you all evening like you were a scheduling issue instead of his mother. The honesty of that landed harder than anything rehearsed would have. She said she almost didn't call, had picked up her phone twice the day before and put it back down because she didn't want to begin her marriage creating problems with her husband's family. Then she laughed once, nervous, embarrassed with herself. I still might have made a mistake, she said. I told her she hadn't. Then she asked quietly, "Are you okay?" I told her I was recovering. I told her I appreciated her reaching out. I gave her nothing about the folder, nothing about Celeste, nothing about any of it. What she had offered was her hand across a distance neither of us had built, and I received it for exactly that. The call lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, I sat with the phone in my lap and thought about what it had cost her to make it. Nathaniel didn't know. Gerald certainly didn't. She had called from her own private discomfort because something in her refused to perform ease she didn't feel. That kind of integrity is not common. Celeste Okafor's office had the quality of a place where serious things get decided without ceremony. She opened the folder. She reviewed the photographs from Gerald's office. She went through 3 months of joint account statements, line by line. When she finished, she set everything down and told me exactly where I stood. Georgia divides marital assets equitably, with full consideration of how those assets were used during the marriage. What I had in that folder was not simply evidence of betrayal. It was evidence of a pattern. Gerald had used marital time, marital resources, and the financial credibility built inside our marriage to construct a fraudulent investment scheme outside of it. Courts had language for that, dissipation of marital assets, and courts could account for it directly in what I walked away with. She explained the adultery ground without softening it. Georgia recognized it as legal basis. A spouse who committed adultery could be barred from receiving spousal support entirely. Then she asked about the woman who sent the folder. Had I been in contact? I told her not directly. I had received documents. We had not spoken. Celeste nodded and said that a formal statement from this woman, if she was willing, would make the pattern she was building very difficult to challenge in court. 2 women, documented financial solicitation, a marriage he concealed from one while living inside it with the other. That was not a single incident. That was a documented pattern of deception. She gave me 3 instructions before I left. Do not confront Gerald. Do not move money or change anything about the joint accounts without speaking to her first. Do not alter any behavior at home that he would notice or question. The longer Gerald believes everything is exactly as he thinks it is, she said, the more useful that certainty becomes to us. I texted the unsaved number on a Tuesday morning at my own kitchen table while Gerald was in the shower upstairs. I read everything in the folder. I'd like to talk if you're willing. The response came in less than an hour. A coffee shop in a part of Atlanta that belonged to neither of our neighborhoods. 2 days from now, noon. I arrived 10 minutes early. I chose a table near the back with sightlines to the door and ordered water and waited. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately, not just from the wedding photographs, but from the way she carried herself. Composed, deliberate. A woman who had decided exactly what she was walking into before she walked into it. She sat down across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Not from awkwardness, from the specific weight of 2 women sitting across from each other who have been made to occupy opposite corners of the same man's deception. That weight needed a moment to settle. She spoke first. She told me she had met Gerald 22 months ago at an investment networking event in Atlanta. He was engaging and specific in the way that registers as genuine, the kind of man who remembers what you said 20 minutes ago and builds on it. He told her he was divorced, that the marriage had ended amicably 2 years prior, that he and his former wife remained civil for the sake of their son. She said he delivered it the way you deliver something that is simply true. No heaviness, no performance, just fact. The investment conversation developed over 6 months. He was building a property venture. He needed capital for warehouse leasing and initial contracts. She believed in the concept. She believed in him. She transferred $38,000 across 2 installments. When he came back for the remaining $22,000, something shifted in her. She couldn't name it precisely. Just a pressure in the ask that felt different from the confidence he usually carried. She stalled. She kept finding reasons to delay. She never transferred it. That instinct kept her watching closely enough to catch what came next. She attended the wedding as his guest. She believed she was simply meeting his son and the new family. During the reception, a guest made an offhand comment about Gerald's wife. Casual, contextual, said by someone who assumed everyone in the room already knew. She spent the following 2 weeks quietly pulling at that thread. What she found assembled itself into a folder she delivered to a hospital before the week was out. When she finished, I opened my phone to the bank statement Celeste had flagged. I turned the screen toward her and pointed to a single line. A transfer from our joint account to Gerald's business account. $11,200, dated 5 months before her first installment reached him. She looked at the figure. Then she looked at me. She understood. Gerald had used our marital money to build enough infrastructure to appear credible. He used my money to position himself to take hers. The stillness that moved across her face was not grief. It was a woman quietly, precisely revising everything she had believed about her own judgment. Then she asked me one question. What do you need from me? I told her. A formal statement for my attorney. Testimony if it reached that point. She nodded once. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. When we stood to leave, Gerald Holloway had no idea that the 2 women he had positioned on opposite sides of his life had just sat across from each other and closed the distance completely. Gerald was home more than usual that week. I watched him the way you watch something you have already decided about. Not searching anymore. Not hoping for a different answer. Just observing. He made dinner on Tuesday. He made dinner again on Thursday. He moved through our kitchen with an ease that should have felt domestic and familiar, but now read differently. Like a man making himself visible on purpose, occupying the space of a good husband with the deliberateness of someone who needs that image maintained for as long as possible. On Wednesday afternoon, he went into his office and closed the door. I sat in the living room and tracked the time without meaning to. When he came out 40 minutes later, the quality of his presence had changed. He was managing something, not the easy management of a man solving a routine problem. The tighter, internal management of a man whose plan was encountering friction he had not scheduled. He sat down and picked up his phone, opened a message, locked the screen, opened it again, locked it again without responding. Then his phone rang. He stared at the screen before finally stepping into the kitchen to answer. His voice stayed low, controlled, but not controlled enough. I heard one sentence clearly. I said, give her a little time. A pause, then sharper. No, don't do anything yet. When he came back into the living room, he carried himself too carefully, like a man suddenly aware of his own movements. He sat down, unlocked his phone, locked it again, then asked if I wanted tea. I still had a full cup beside me. Whatever was fraying on his end had started reaching into the room with us. Celeste filed on a Tuesday morning. I was not in her office when she did it. I was in my kitchen watching the light come through the window the way it does in Atlanta in the early morning. Flat and clean and indifferent to everything happening beneath it. My phone showed a text at 9:04. It's filed. I read it and set the phone down and finished my coffee. The filing named adultery and dissipation of marital assets. It was not a letter, not a warning, not an opening gesture designed to prompt negotiation. It was a completed legal document with specific figures, documented timelines, transfer records, and a court date already attached. The pattern assembled into language courts recognize and cannot easily dismiss. The same week, a civil claim was filed in a separate court. Fraudulent inducement, misrepresentation of marital status, recovery of $38,000 transferred across 2 installments. Gerald's own text messages, in which he had explicitly stated he was divorced. attached to a filing that now had a case number. 2 courts, 2 filings, 1 man named in both simultaneously. What happened after that moved the way real consequences move, slowly over weeks, in the procedural way that does not feel dramatic while it is happening but is entirely permanent when it is done. Gerald's contacts in Atlanta began creating distance. Not loudly, no announcement, no organized response. Simply, the quiet withdrawal of people who have read something they cannot unread and have decided that proximity to the named party now carries a cost they are unwilling to absorb. Meetings that had been pending stopped being scheduled. A man named Clarence Whitfield, a colleague who had connected Gerald to most of his professional opportunities in the past decade, simply stopped including him in things. In a community where inclusion was its own currency, that withdrawal spent like a verdict. Gerald retained an attorney within the week. The financial disclosures came. The negotiations stretched across conference calls and correspondence. Celeste told me about those conversations the way she told me everything. Without drama, without performance. She said Gerald's opening position reflected a man who had not yet fully accounted for what the documentation showed. She said she had structured her counter to make the dimensions of his actual position very clear. She used the phrase limited room. Over the weeks that followed, that room narrowed further. The civil settlement closed 3 weeks before the divorce finalized. She texted me 2 words, "It's done." I wrote back 4. "Thank you for the folder." She said nothing after that, and neither did I. We were not friends. We did not need to be. We were 2 women who had been positioned as enemies by the same man and had chosen instead to be honest with each other at the precise moment that honesty was most costly and most necessary. That has its own integrity. Nathaniel came on a Saturday morning without calling ahead. I heard the knock, and when I opened the door, my son was standing there looking like a man who had driven to this address before he had fully decided he was coming. His father's jaw. My eyes. He was holding nothing. No flowers, no rehearsed explanation. Just himself standing in the particular discomfort of someone who knows they owe a presence they don't yet know how to give. I stepped back and let him in. He sat on the living room couch and looked at his hands for a long moment. I sat across from him and waited, not to punish him with silence, but because I had learned in these past months that filling silences for people who had hurt me was a habit that served neither of us. If he had come here, he had come with something. I was going to let him find it himself. He said he hadn't known about the investment scheme, about the other woman, about what his father had been running for nearly 2 years. He said it like a man setting down something that had become too heavy to carry without acknowledging the weight. Then he said the caption, and stopped. He could not finish that sentence. We both knew it. We both sat with the fact that there was no version of it that arrived somewhere acceptable. He did not try to find one. That was the first honest thing he had done in this room. Then he said, "Dad always said you were," and stopped again. But I heard the shape of it anyway. I heard 23 months of careful reframing. A wife who had checked out. A mother too absorbed in her own career to be present. A woman who had been pulling away long before anyone else did. I heard the story Gerald had built and tended and handed to his son so gradually that Nathaniel had stopped being able to see where his father's words ended and his own conclusions began. I did not say any of that aloud. Instead, I answered the question he hadn't asked yet. I told him what I remembered about his childhood. I told him about the 5th grade spelling bee. He froze on the 3rd round, a word he had practiced 40 times at our kitchen table, and looked out at the audience with that expression children get when the mind goes suddenly and completely blank. And I was in the 4th row, and I mouthed the word to him slowly, and he saw me, and he spelled it correctly. And afterward, he had held my hand walking to the car and said nothing, which was more than most words would have been. I told him about the summer he had his wisdom teeth removed and didn't want to ask me to stay home with him because he was 17 and believed that needing people at 17 was embarrassing. And I had stayed home anyway without being asked, and we had watched films all day. And he had fallen asleep on the couch with his head near my shoulder, and I had not moved for 2 hours. because I understood that some forms of comfort only work if you don't announce them. I told him he used to call my name from the other end of the house when he was small, not because he needed something, just to hear me answer. Just to confirm I was there. He sat very still through all of it. He did not cry. He looked at me the way someone looks at something they are trying to reconcile with a version they were given and believed for a long time. When he stood to leave, I walked him to the door. He hugged me, brief, slightly stiff, the physical awkwardness of two people remembering how to be in contact after distance. I watched him walk to his car. I did not call after him. That evening, my phone buzzed once. A message from Simone. 2 words. He talked. Gerald moved out on a Wednesday. He did not leave because he chose to. The legal proceedings had made continued cohabitation untenable, and Celeste had structured the filing from the beginning to protect my occupancy rights specifically. He packed what he needed into 2 trips. I was not home when it happened. That was deliberate. I had no interest in watching him perform dignity on his way out of a house he had already left in every way that mattered. The divorce finalized on a Thursday morning. I was in my kitchen. Celeste called at 10:31. "It's done," she said. "Thank you," I said. George's equitable distribution had produced an outcome shaped entirely by what the documentation showed. I retained the house. I received a compensatory distribution that fully accounted for the dissipated marital funds, the $11,200 transfer Gerald had used to build fraudulent credibility, and the documented pattern of deception that Celeste had assembled across both legal proceedings. I was awarded long-term spousal support that Gerald's documented adultery left him in no position to challenge, not as punishment, as consequence. The distinction mattered to me. Nathaniel and Simone came for Sunday dinner 3 weeks after the divorce closed. It was the first time in years that my son had sat at my table. I cooked the things I knew how to cook well, and I set the table properly, and when they knocked, I opened the door and let them in without ceremony. It was not seamless. There were careful pauses where ease used to live. A politeness between Nathaniel and me that had not yet softened into the older, more comfortable thing we once had. We were rebuilding in the specific way that real things rebuild, slowly, without announcements, one ordinary moment placed beside another. Midway through dinner, Nathaniel asked about the garden on the back porch. I had mentioned it to him once, briefly, weeks ago. He had held on to it. That small act, paying attention to something I had said and carrying it forward, told me more about where he was than anything he could have put into words. I told him about it. After we ate, we went outside. I showed him what was just beginning to grow. He crouched down close to the soil and looked at something and asked a question about it. I answered. Simone stood nearby with her arms folded against the evening air. We stayed out there longer than made practical sense. Standing behind my own house in the warm Atlanta evening, my son beside me, looking at something I was tending, I felt something I want to name carefully. Not happiness exactly, not peace exactly. Something more specific than either. The particular texture of a life that has come back into your own hands after being held by someone who never had the right to hold it. I did not think about Gerald that night. I went inside. I washed the dishes. I turned off the kitchen light. I walked through every room of my house in the quiet of an evening that belonged entirely to me. 34 years of contract law had taught me to read every document carefully. To never trust that the person who prepared something had your interests in mind. To look for what is not said as often as what is. To understand that the gap between what a document claims and what it actually delivers is precisely where people get hurt. I had read every contract of my professional life with those eyes. It took a hospital bed and a folder left at a front desk and 7 words from an unsaved number for me to understand that the most important document I had failed to read carefully was the one I had signed 31 years ago at an altar. Not the legal document itself, but the daily, accumulated living version of it. The one that gets rewritten not in lawyers' offices, but in kitchen conversations and small withdrawals in the particular art of making someone feel sufficiently comfortable that they stop asking questions. Gerald had been rewriting that document for 23 months. I had been too trusting to notice. I was not too trusting to respond. And that, the response, the folder read carefully on a hospital tray, the methodical movement through a house with a phone camera, the attorney called from a husband's chair, the coffee shop meeting across from a woman I should never have had to meet. That was 34 years of professional discipline applied to the most personal thing I had ever had to protect. Every room of this house is mine. The garden on the back porch is growing. My son asked about it. That is where my story ends, and where something else, something I cannot yet name but can already feel the shape of, is just beginning. If this story gave you something, a language for what you have been carrying quietly, a clarity about what belongs to you and what was taken without your full knowledge, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Tell me what you stopped explaining away. Because the moment you stopped accepting explanations that protected everyone but you, that was the moment everything changed. That moment is available to you. It has always been available.